Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us and looking forward to having this discussion with you. As you know, you are joining this workshop about scale up, from startup to scale up. And what we want to cover today is really what would it take to start or scale a business? Is there a difference between them or are they the same? Now, we've done this workshop in several different ways. We've done it for organizations to usually support entrepreneurs in the community. So helping them understand what's the ecosystem that is needed to support that is usually what we focus on. But today I'm going to focus on, from an entrepreneurial perspective, for you to start or scale, what would be some of the things that are maybe similar or maybe different. So just quickly on the chat, since we got you here already, thank you for joining us during Global Entrepreneurship Week. Please go ahead and tell us your first name, maybe one word that describes you right now. It can be changed later, but for now, and then what would you like to get out of today's session? I'm going to cover just a little bit about startup to scale up. I'm going to talk about what are some of the differences or commonalities between them. Entrepreneurship, as we know, and you might have attended some of other workshops about entrepreneurship, it's a whole journey, and we won't have time to go through it today, but I wanted to highlight that entrepreneurs, as they start these businesses or grow them, they take a path, and sometimes it's not a clear path, and sometimes it's full of surprises. But their ability to adapt and modify and keep going allows them to stay in business as long as they can or want to. And this entrepreneurship, from what those who've attended some of our workshops before, you know that we talk about the mindset, right? From a perspective of a mindset versus, what is an entrepreneur or what is not an entrepreneur. A good book for that is E-Myth Revisited, which he talks about the manager, the technician, and the entrepreneur. Most of the times, the entrepreneurs who start businesses, and this is why you might want to differentiate between a startup and a scale up, usually are really good at technical skill, accounting, a lawyer, a doctor, a carpenter, right? A cook, whatever the skill they have. It doesn't have to be technical, but they are technically savvy in one thing. And then they occasionally are really not good managers. Sometimes they are good managers, so they can't really manage multiple projects. And maybe they can, maybe they can't. And they have what I'm going to call the entrepreneurial bug. At one point, you need to have maybe three people. One is the technician, that they're really good at the widget making or service providing. One is really good at managing, and one is good at finding opportunities that they could bring back to the business. With that being said, that's the mindset of an entrepreneur that I'd like you to focus on. So what's a startup? What do you think that means? Love to hear some of your comments on the chat or in the comments or just in an email, whatever you want to write it down somewhere. What does it mean when you hear a startup? And as you can imagine, we have been lucky enough to ask this question in lots of places, and each place always give me a different answer. But from my perspective, a good description of a startup is what Steve Blank mentioned before, which is an organization that is in search of its business model. So they're looking to figure out what is it that they want to do or they want to be. And this is why sometimes you might see a business been around for 7 years, but they still operate like a startup because they really haven't figured out what is it that they really do every day, because they keep changing every day. Scale up, what do you think that means from when you hear the word scale up? Love to hear some of your thoughts on that. And yeah, scale up is exactly what it sounds like, right? You could build one building, but can you build 10 or 15 or 20? You could build one thing, can you do more of it or on how often, right? So that's really what we're looking at here from a scale up. Can you keep things moving forward with what you've built? And that one thing I always mention is if you couldn't build the first startup, sometimes it's harder to scale up. Or if you scale up without good foundations of a startup, it potentially could lead to a disaster of a falling apart of the scale. By the way, no right or wrong from these startup versus scale up, but I want to talk to you about what's some of the insights that we've learned about each one of them. And I will challenge you to rethink it from your perspective. I'm just not going to be able to highlight every single thing. I'm going to focus today on 5 insights about startups. What are some of those insights? You might know already, but I'm going to give you the framework for it. First one that we've noticed, and remember, our findings comes from the learning of working with entrepreneurs who are usually underserved, underrepresented, or a minority group in a community. So it comes with this operating of limited resources or scarcity, you might call it, or from the perspective that I have no access to such good information or good resources, time, money, people. And they're operating that way. So usually the startup is trying to sell as much as they can and keep as much as they can because they don't know if they're going to be able to sell it again the next day. That is a startup mode, what we've seen. Now, you might say, well, first, my startup was funded for like, $5 million. Well, it's a different story then, right? You can't really talk about this from that perspective. I'm talking about underserved, underrepresented, a minority group, a startup in that space. Usually they're starting because they usually have no choice but to start a business. And therefore, they're operating from a scarcity mode, meaning that I don't know if this is going to be here next year or not, or next week or not. So I'm going to keep what I can. I will also say that one of the things that we learned really quickly about them is they don't really have a clear, what I'm going to call, way of making money, right? They don't really have a clear business model. And what I mean by that is they're not sure of how exactly they make money. Today, they're selling cups of water. Tomorrow, they're selling cookies. If you ask them which one do they sell more of, they usually may not know what the answers are going to be. They're just like, we do really well. And once they say we do really well with one item, you do a little bit of quick audit and then realize they haven't sold one for like 3 months. So they're really not really clear about how they make money. And they're just trying to figure it out. Please don't misunderstand. No right or wrong, it's just what the startup is, okay? We also learned that they have usually one center, meaning that everything has to go back to that one owner or one founder or multiple founders. No decisions can be made without consulting with that person. Well, that usually is a challenge because scaling up, you're going to probably need to loosen that up, right? So startups, sometimes they face these challenges of a bottleneck because they have to go through to one person to approve or disapprove. Customers have to go to that person. Employees have to go to that person. Supplies have to go to that person. Anything else that happens in the business have to go to that person. So they're the center of it all. Again, no right or wrong, is just a thing for you to be aware of. And I bring this up because people say they have lots of systems in place to start the business. Well, usually if it's a startup, most likely they have no system. And this is what I mean, like, what system? What are you talking about? What's the system of placing an order? What system? You just come and order. What's the system of replacing the items that you just sold? What system? We just call and buy what we need. What system do you have placed once the checks are being deposited? Well, we deposit the checks and we just wait for them to clear. Really, they might have some systems in place. They might have some processes written down, but to the most part, there's really no one system that is comprehensive to say deposits every night at 9 p.m. has to be made by the following day, and follow up on a bank to make sure that the hold is being released. None of those things usually exist. Now, they might have some, and I will also say that they might have some occasionally not written down, but they follow it, and they really might have not taken the time to write it down. So that's usually what a startup is. So as you can see, it's a little bit messy, right? It's a little bit scarcity, and it's a little bit all over the place, and they're trying to figure it out. And by the way, please don't take it the wrong way. It's no right or wrong. It's just different. To scale, you might want to think about what I just covered from the opposite perspective, right? Should you have a system in place? Now, the truth is you can never have everything systemized. You're going to have something systemized. What are those things that are systemized? You might have, rather than having one center, you might have multiple centers. So one person can make decisions on buying the supplies. One person can make decisions for the customers. One person can make decisions with the schedule, right? So you have multiple, center points. You probably know exactly how you make money. You sell widget A, you sell service B, whatever that is. You have a system in place or a product in place to make you sell or make you make money. So think about that as we go through it. Now, growing a business usually requires a little bit more than just what we discussed there, in addition to what we covered in those 5 insights about, startups. I want to think when you're growing a business, you want to articulate a couple of things. Because you're already in business, you don't need to worry about the scarcity. Now, the truth of the matter is that some entrepreneurs still today, as they scale up, they're still operating with the mindset of a startup, scarcity. And if you want to shift that from scarcity to growing a business, you have to change it to abundance and investments, because you might be putting some effort that you might not see the results for 2 or 3 years later. But you have to understand how that works. So identifying what exactly you want to go after, because you might also have at the time multiple streams of revenue, and you could decide which one makes sense, or you might decide you want to go after a new stream of revenue. And then you want to identify what is it that you have, because at this moment you're running a business. So you can decide what is it that you have to support this new venture or specific opportunity you want to support, right? And you might want to think about what adjustment needs to be made: hiring staff, adding staff, training staff, leadership team, right? Funding needs, all those things could be part of it, of adjustment that is needed. And then, of course, if you're missing something, you need to make sure that you identify and address that and decide, do you want to keep it going or not? And the last thing I'm going to mention, in the growing a business, key difference is you have to shift your mindset from a startup mode to growth mode. So how do you identify an opportunity? Well, you could look around and see what you have in your business today. Are you serving a specific segment of customers that could potentially be bigger? Are you serving a customers, or are you not serving a specific geographical area or a specific type of customer that you could potentially start offering it to them? Are you is your product positioned to specific customers? Can you reposition it? Can you modify it to apply it for other people, for others to be interested in? So usually there's an example. You sell shampoo. Can you sell it to smaller size for the travelers, right? So it doesn't mean that you've changed much, except you changed the size of the bottle. So now it's for the travelers. You might say, well, I only sell it in the airports. Well, can you start selling in the grocery stores? These are the things that you could think about from one way to think about what's the opportunity that you're thinking about. And then I would say you want to think about what is it that you have to go after this opportunity. You might say, I have already a logistical company that could probably ship to all these other stores. I already have a company that could potentially, or a supplier that potentially would be interested in buying this from me. Or potentially already have an MOU with a company that actually have locations in the airports and outside the airports. We just never shipped it outside the airports. So what is it that you have that you could potentially start using to get you to sell your product or service to the new opportunity that you are identifying? And I would say, as you identify and start going after these things, you might want to think about what adjustment needs to be made. Do you have to move anything around? Do you have to add more things? Do you need more supplies? Do you need more manufacturing capacity? Do you need more people? Do you need less people? Do you need some automation? What adjustments do you need to make that work? You might need cash. You might say, I need like 3 months cash flow because I'm going to run into challenges with cash. So you want to think through that idea to what adjustment needs to be made to make your business grow. And I was saying earlier, you might want to identify what you're missing, what you need, because you might say, although I make these adjustments, I'm going to need XYZ. I'm going to need a CTO. I'm going to need a CFO. I'm going to need X number of dollars. I'm going to need a new relationship with a logistical company. Those things can happen when you take the time to understand what are you missing and what are you needing and how you could add or modify or shuffle around sometimes, because you might already have it. It's just you're not using it. And one of the things I learned from entrepreneurs who scaled is you might want to nail it before you scale it, right? So when you nail it, meaning that you understand that if an order comes through, this is the exact process it goes through. Here's how we fulfill it. Here's how we handle if it's not fulfilled. Here's how we handle if the customer is happy or unhappy. Here's what needs to be done for it to happen again. And that's what I mean by nailing it, right? Understanding what's your solution, how does it work, what are the processes, Now, please remember, I've not yet met anyone, excuse me, I've not met yet anyone that has had all of these things figured out 100%. But I've met a lot of people that figured out really good portions of it. So understanding that you won't 100% nail it, but you're going to be pretty close, right? It doesn't mean that you won't have a grade A. It just won't be perfect. Once you nail it, then you can scale it. And please don't wait till it's 100% accurate, because if you're there, most people, that does not exist. So you must be dreaming. You got to get to one point and then think about it. I use this example all the time. Software. You might have a phone in your hand today. I wonder if you've gotten any upgrades or updates for your software. Well, that means they released it before it was 100% perfect. And there was more flaws once they released it, that they discovered that they released an update. I know maybe it's not unfair because things pop up, and especially in the security world, but the reality is things are changing all the time that we'll just have to keep updating. Same thing with clothing, same thing with dresses, same thing with anything else that you do. There's always a release first, and then there's an adjustment and then a modification. So please, nailing it doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. It does have to be a good product or service. It could be a great product and a great service. It's just, you gotta have to have some systems in place to make it work. And it doesn't mean that you won't find holes in the system, and don't try to fix them all before you launch. You launch and then you fix them as you go. So I hope that this conversation with you today helps you think through how to start versus scale, and the difference between startup and scale up mode, starting with your mindset and then scaling up from startup to scale up. And as you can see through the discussion today, I highlighted about 10 items, 5 in each of the startup and 5 in each of the scale up, that the insights that we've seen allowed people to do really well with their startup or scale up mode that they're in with their business. Please note that there are many other insights that we could share, but of course, we could spend the next 2-3 days here together just talking about that. The goal with this was to inspire you, to hopefully interest you, to want to learn more. Of course, you can do this on your own, and of course, we would love to have an opportunity to engage you as well. There are, by the way, lots of tools out there today that could help you figure this out. We actually have one of our own. We actually have about 20 different programs we plug in based on the needs and wants of the community or the entrepreneur. This is one of them, which is the Resilient Entrepreneur Program, which can potentially walk you through the startup versus scale up mode through a different components that we look at. Like the mindset, the self, the business, and the moving forward. And each one of those components have, as you can see, a few more components that could walk you through each one of them. This is just one example. As I mentioned, we have about 20 some programs that could walk you through different ideas, from the growth wheel to the canvas, the resilient canvas, to the business planning, and everything else in between. I want to take this minute to say thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate your engagement. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. If you have any thoughts, please feel free to drop them in the chat or in the email or in your notes. And maybe next time I see you or talk to you, you could share. Would love to hear it from you. And of course, for those who would like to stay in touch and interested to connect, please use your phone to stay connected. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you around. Have a good day.